Okay, thank you for joining me for this episode of Global Perspectives. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Bill Winters, the Group Chief Exec of Standard Chartered. Thank you ever so much, Bill, for joining us today.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very much. We're looking back over the last decade, and about 10 years ago, you joined Standard Chartered.
Yep.
So do you feel more or less positive and optimistic about the global economy than you did 10 years ago when you joined Standard Chartered?
When I joined Standard Chartered, I felt pretty positive about the global economy. I think given what we've been through in the subsequent 10 years, that positivism was reasonably well placed. Obviously, there have been some ups and downs through that period, but broadly positive. And as I sit here today, I feel pretty positive about the global economy, maybe for slightly different reasons. But it certainly feels riskier today than it did 10 years ago. But the base case view, the sort of the down the middle view, is pretty good. Good momentum in global economic activity. Delivering growth is probably at or maybe a little bit above potential. Very significant supply chain shocks and supply chain reconfiguration, and no doubt that's going to continue to evolve with new administrations in the U.S. and elsewhere. But nevertheless, globalization is alive and well. Trade is I wouldn't say it's thriving, but is growing. And not at the pace that it was in the go-go days of globalization, but still growing. And I suspect once we get through this repositioning, that will be that globalization will be a good, strong catalyst for growth. In the meantime, the service sector is going truly global.
Yeah.
Of course, one important part of the service sector is what you do and what we do.
Yeah.
So we're very grateful for that. And business is good.
I love the term go-go days. I want to use that elsewhere. In terms of geopolitical tensions, you mentioned trade, and obviously we've seen some of the biggest economies in the world have some geopolitical tensions. How do you think that's going to play out in terms of trade in the near future?
It's already played out substantially, right? We can say that this chapter of the trade war started probably even before 2016, but certainly Trump made a lot of noise about it at the time, and took a lot of action. Biden has carried on directionally with that. Probably in a more predictable way, but nevertheless, but probably a more severe way, actually. And of course, the rhetoric now is for further escalations. And, the global economy hasn't derailed. And while I think it contributed to the spike in inflation that we had, not the primary driver, obviously, the primary driver was probably more coming out of COVID and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But a driver was just trade frictions and supply chain frictions that found their way in the system. Possibly there's another round of that. Which will almost certainly be further inflationary, and that obviously throws grist into the mill of the global economy. But that said, the markets, trading markets, financial markets re-equilibrate very quickly, and it's amazing how quickly you have major new manufacturing centers popping up across the ASEAN countries. India is very, very focused on developing a manufacturing capability to rival China. They have a long way to go. But the whole Made in India initiative, which is supported by key investments in infrastructure, some key inducements for foreign groups to invest in India, obviously supported by a very, very substantial home market in that case. I'm not too worried that globalization is going into retreat, but I do worry about what the friction cost is, how quickly that friction cost is realized, and then how quickly it's resolved, because along the way there's every opportunity for accident.
It's interesting you say globalization. You don't think globalization is going to retreat. Some people would disagree with that, and they would be very nervous and say, nearshoring, localization of supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. The growth of places like Mexico to support the US and India's growth is, do you see the counter view in terms of globalization?
Oh, I see it. And we don't have to look at too far back in history to have seen instances where policy-led errors led to things like Great Depressions. That came out of many things, but certainly an excess of financial speculation, under-regulation, and trade wars. So we could definitely repeat the mistakes of the past. And as we know, humankind regularly repeats the mistakes of the past, but usually not exactly the same way. I think we're probably a little bit better informed this time. I think the electorate is a little bit better informed this time. And the costs manifest themselves quicker. So, a spike in inflation in the United States would be quite detrimental to the election prospects of the incoming government, as it would anywhere else in the world. So one would think they would take some steps to avoid that. I'm pretty sure that they will. which is not to say that the protectionist or tariff-heavy influence of the policy decisions that they're taking is going to disappear. It won't. But I think it'll be measured in terms of the way that it's introduced, and the world will have a chance to rebalance.
Perhaps the other big thing that's happening, the big revolution, is the technology revolution. And that's particularly true in banking, because you've seen the growth of digital banking, you've seen the growth of fintechs, really dynamic sector. How do you think that's going to impact sort of traditional banking models going forward?
I think it's going to make traditional banking models better. So, we've got, I'll say, the two fastest and best digital banks in the world, in Hong Kong and Singapore. I mean, the good news is we have them. We built them from scratch. The bad news is they're not the biggest markets in the world. But Hong Kong obviously is on the border of China and is part of China. But from a financial market perspective, is just a stone throw away from the Greater Bay Area, and is part of it. So the fact that we as a call it a traditional or incumbent bank is able to create a digital bank, which is already disrupting the Hong Kong market, it's disrupting ourselves. But frankly, I'd rather own the thing that disrupts us than have it owned by somebody else. Likewise, Singapore, and we've got 20% of the bankable population in Singapore has signed up for a trust account, which is our digital bank in Singapore. Number one net promoter score, off the charts customer satisfaction, super high app store ratings. Right, this is what banks can do if we decide just to do it right. If we decide to play defense and defend our turf, then of course we're going to be behind. But we only did that in partnership with fintechs, right? So fintechs are our friends. They're our partners. Sometimes they compete with us. That's fine as well, because they make us better. Maybe the most exciting thing about the digital investments that we've made are how it's made our mothership, the main bank, better. So I'm not averse to a little internal competition from time to time. And when my colleagues in Standard Chartered in Singapore see the innovations that are coming out of our digital bank, which is a separate standalone entity with external partners, they say, well, that's quite good. We like that. And how can we incorporate that into our product offering? So we're a much better bank by virtue of the competition coming from fintechs, our own and other people's. And that will be the case going forward. The banks that try to defend the incumbent position, I think it's going to be tough.
And you've talked about, obviously, you're a very Asia-heavy bank. Asia typically very progressive and forward-thinking in many of these areas. If you think about Europe, and it's a mixed bag, but aspects of European banking are far more traditional. Do you think they have a revolution still to come in Europe, and they're going to follow the Asian model? Is that inevitable?
Well, I think some of the best innovations in fintech have come out of Europe as well. So I'm thinking about, I guess, two of the three very large digital banks, if you can call them that, are coming out of Europe, and both based in the UK, but much more European. I mean, it's broadly European, but of course the UK has been a fantastic incubator for things like that. Of course, you've got other fantastic banks coming out of Latin America. It's happening everywhere, and I think the UK has done a really good job of cultivating and incubating the ecosystem for fintech. Singapore is also doing a very good job. We have the great pleasure of operating in both, so we can sort of see the best of both worlds. Hong Kong has got its own ecosystem, a little bit more China oriented, but that makes sense given the country of which they're part. The organic innovation in India is just phenomenal, but in that case it benefited from a fair amount of government catalysts. So, a national ID system, biometrically verified, a national payment platform that was seeded by the government, although built by the private sector, has enabled an enormously powerful.
And many people are not aware of those things. They're actually amazing developments in India, aren't they? Those two developments.
Absolutely amazing. And the idea that through time, India could have an e-commerce ecosystem that is, if we could be a bit socialist about it, say owned by the people, rather than owned by some big tech companies, is it's unique. It's unique to India, and they have a reasonable chance of making that work.
And if you talk to any CEO today, the two letters AI always come up in every single conversation. And lots of people are quite nervous about AI. They're sort of doom mongers about what's going to happen with AI. My personal view is that AI is an enabler. It's an amazing opportunity for people to have more exciting jobs, and it's not something to worry about as such. Is that your view?
That's definitely our view. I mean, it's going to make vast swathes of what we do today much more efficient. It's going to lead to much better customer service and customer outcomes, which is ultimately how we create value. It's definitely going to displace some jobs as well, and we know that. So our big focus today, recognizing that many of these innovations will take some time to play out. We're building platforms today that will roll out in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So we can know the jobs that are going to be impacted. It's not overnight. So we focus on reskilling. And we've been really fortunate. I think well over close to half of the jobs that we are creating in Standard Chartered are filled internally. And these are people who are switching job categories. And that's through reskilling. And KPMG has a big role to play in that. Every employer has a big role to play in that. I'd like to think that we're kind of at the cutting edge in terms of ongoing learning and development. But we want every single employee who may be displaced, or not just, every employee that wants to advance themselves to be able to acquire new age skills. And if we can make that available, we'll hold on to the best people, we'll attract the best people. And if some of them go outside to use their skills in an outside job, that's good as well, because we'll have a great ambassador outside the bank.
I share your view. I don't think we need to be worrying about the future in this way. I think people have just got to adapt, and I think actually there's a great future. One of the things is, though, I think as you look, and I have teenage children, you've got to think about what are the skills of the future. And as you look forward in terms of the skills that are so essential for people who work in banking in the future, what would you say are those essential skills? And are they different from the skills that you would have looked for 20 years ago?
I'm at risk of like talking my personal book, but I've always thought that sort of critical thinking skills and creative skills are the ones that are most enduring.
Yeah.
And obviously we've gone through a period where we're STEM skills, we could call them that, or now in today's environment, data skills, data analytics, and the infrastructure building around that are critical, mission critical skills, and they are. And obviously the people who are developing these path breaking technologies probably didn't study economic history or philosophy and religion.
I did a history degree, remember? We'll keep.
So did I. So did I. But I do think the skills that will be enduring when the machines really are that smart, and we're getting close to the point that they are.
Yeah.
Out-machining the machines seems like a bit of a mug's game, but being able to continually overlay that human dimension to extraordinary computing capacity and critical thinking coming from a computer, I think are the skills that are going to be relevant for tomorrow. By the way, they make more interesting people as well. So
the big debate in talent is how post-COVID, how do you balance flexibility, productivity, collaboration within a global organization? And marrying all those different things are quite tricky. And people have quite diametrically opposed views in terms of working in the office, not working in the office, and you see it played out in different areas. What's your view as to how you balance all those different things?
I mean, I guess for starters, we probably don't think about it as balancing, because balancing suggests that if you give one, you're taking away from the other. So we want it all. We want to have the cake, we want to eat it, and then we want it, the leftovers for tomorrow as well. So what that means is, we need a collaboration framework that's independent of where people are sitting, and we need a focus on productivity and efficiency that's independent of working patterns. Of course, not easy to do, which is the thrust of your question. We've erred pretty consistently on the side of flexibility for employees. We know that there are strong sort of local and cultural characteristics that mean we have very different outcomes in different markets. So if we go to our office in Korea or China, it's going to be 99% of the people in the office every day. If we go to our service center in India, we have 30,000 people across India. A heavy degree of adoption of the flexible skills. Their jobs allow themselves to do their work remotely. Employees are saving 2.5, 3 hours a day of commuting, and we know just by observation that they're giving us a fair amount of that back in terms of real constructive work, and they're happier. So we're happy with that degree of flexibility. We are tracking it, and when we see collaboration falling off, and if we think that that's attributed to or attributable to a lack of physical co-location, then we'll give people a reason to come back into the office. And rather than tell them you have to come in, let's set up the day, either through obviously the office environment for starters, but also the way that we organize meetings, the way that we have collaboration sessions where it's expected that you're there in person. So far, we've been okay with that. But I know there are different views that if you don't force people to come in 4 or 5 days a week, you're not going to get that natural, spontaneous collaboration. We haven't found that yet. And in fact, the benefit that we get by offering flexibility, we think is more valuable, but we're going to watch it and we'll see.
And we're very much the same. So we've not gone down the mandatory route. We've definitely gone down the flexible route, and actually we've not seen a drop off in collaboration either. One of the other big things that you're very interested in is sustainability, and the role of green financing will increasingly become important in the future. How do you see that evolving over time?
We're also seeing the realization that the climate change is real, manifesting itself all the time. And uh, nobody's really credibly debunking the climate change story. Sort of some people are, but I say they're on the fringe. The And we've got countries in the world, I would say probably including China, well, definitely including China, who are actually taking a lead on this. Not entirely lacking self-interest because they're producing the clean tech equipment that's going to be used to fight climate change, but uh, our sustainable finance business, transition finance business, is going from strength to strength. So it's a real business. We're very happy to be doing good business. That's real business. It allows us to continue to invest. And of course, given the nature of our bank, a large share of that is coming in developing economies. Some meaningful proportion is blended finance of some sort, where export credit agencies or Exim banks or multilateral development banks are our partners in those financings. This is really good stuff. And we've not seen any slackening of the pace at all. In fact, we found that as some financing models are evidenced to be working, there's more and more happening.
You mentioned ESG and sustainability. There's this odd dynamic that's going on where people are they're changing the language. And we had this in our survey. 69% of people in our survey said they were going to stop using the term ESG and start using the term sustainability. Why do you think ESG as a term has got a bad reputation?
We've never really been big on using the ESG term. We have a clear focus on sustainability as a policy. We have a clear focus on sustainable finance as a business line, sustainable / transition finance. We have a clear focus on governance in our bank. I think every corporation does, but I think we're very clear about that. And we've got a broad range of other initiatives which are important to us, including diversity and inclusion and biodiversity and nature preservation and supporting the rights of local communities, which is, given how local we are as a bank, it's critically important to us, not necessarily the case for everybody. So there's a broad range of things that we're focused on. If we want to lump them together into one moniker, we can call it ESG, but that doesn't help too much in terms of guidance.
And in terms of the markets that you're operating in, you have this absolutely critical role in sustainable development and economic development. And in theory, those two things should go together, but they can sometimes clash or not always go together. What's your feeling in how you get the balance right between sustainable development and economic development?
I don't think they clash so much conceptually, but they clash in short term versus long term. There's always a desire to get your economic boost before the next election cycle, and but then make sure that we're paying attention to there being an election cycle after that. You don't find yourself either in unbearable heat or underwater. So a key focus for us is overcoming the natural bias of regulation, which is to force banks in particular to shorter and shorter term financing. And we know that there are insurance companies and pension funds whose liabilities are naturally much longer. So our job, as it were, is to marshal the long-term capital resources and address them into both short-term, medium-term, and long-term economic needs. So that in that way, they don't conflict. But in terms of our own balance sheets, it's very difficult for us to provide long-term financing in risky markets. It's just from a capital perspective, we're structurally disadvantaged. And that's by design. I mean, it's not an accident. It's just exactly what the policymakers want. Not to underfeed emerging markets and infrastructure projects, but to take that out of the banking system. So, so there's a short-term versus long-term trade-off. And thankfully, there are key investors in the world, starting with the MDBs, but including export credit agencies and other form of philanthropic capital, which is not irrelevant. It can't solve the problems of the world, but it's a great catalyst that are thinking much longer term. And our job is to make sure that we're marrying those funds with the expertise that's necessary to provide good returns to that capital, however measured, social or economic, over the long term.
I often get asked the question by journalists or other people: people are bored of ESG now? Is it sort of past its peak? My answer is always no. Actually, it's the opposite. It's now become embedded into businesses. People might not talk about it as frothily as they did 2 or 3 years ago, but in fact, you could take that as a positive, that it's now embedded into businesses and people take it very seriously. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And I think we all felt that we probably got to the point where we were overdoing the hyperbole.
Yeah.
And overdoing the diagnosis. I don't need to hear again
Yeah.
the dire consequences of 2 degree or a 3 degree, forget about a 3 degree world. I mean, we kind of believe, I believe it certainly now. What I want is very concrete things that we can do differently. So I just call out one guy who I applaud tremendously because he really stuck his neck out, is Ajay Banga at the World Bank. And Ajay said, look, I don't want to talk about these horrific numbers anymore. I want to get a group of private sector folks together to work with the World Bank group. They've interestingly brought in other MDBs as well and said, we're going to create a private sector lab and we're going to come up with very, very concrete things that will get money into projects that are going to make a difference so that we don't have to worry about these big numbers. And it's blocking and tackling. It's against, of course, the World Bank has to bring their shareholders along, which isn't always an easy thing to do, given the natural constituency. But it's making a difference. And I see hundreds, and that's a big one, that's a visible one, but there are hundreds of initiatives that are, let's just get some stuff done, and let's get it done today. And if it works, then we'll see if we can increase it by hundreds of times to make a real impact on this fight.
Changing tack slightly, you've been a very senior leader in financial services for a long time. You've been at Standard Chartered for about almost 10 years. If you look back over that decade and over that career, what's the biggest lesson you've learned about leadership, and what would you advise other people who are coming into leadership?
Big question. I'm still learning every day a lot.
That might be the answer.
That is probably my answer. I mean, certainly the thing that keeps me going is that I'm learning big lessons every day. Lessons about my own mistakes and errors of judgment or whatever. Lessons about the things that repeat themselves, and the lessons about things that are unexpected that really grab you out of the blue. I mean, my 10 years at Standard Chartered have been characterized by, my fundamental belief that we had a bank that was a really good bank with a good franchise that had hit some problems. And of course, I got brought in because there were problems, not because they wanted to give me a free ride. Yeah, that in and of itself, of course, the problems were a little bit different than I diagnosed coming in, maybe a little bit more severe. And just as we were coming out of that, we had China devaluation, and we had COVID, which was not small by any means for a bank like ours. Trade wars, we've got a big China presence, civil unrest in Hong Kong, our biggest market. So, it's been those are all the downsides. The upside is economic growth has been persistent throughout. We've had no major financial crises in the world. We've got an accumulation of wealth in our markets, which is unprecedented. We happen to be the third largest wealth manager in Asia, so that suits us really well. We've got a really good business. So lots of bad things have happened, lots of challenges, but the underlying trend is really very good. And I look out to the future. I see those trends will extend for, in my opinion, for years to come. Of course, it could be derailed by any number of horrific things that we could imagine that we talk about all the time. But those things won't kill us, right? They will not kill us. They would hurt us, but they won't kill us. And that's because we built in some resilience and strength. So I had a fascinating sort of back-to-back video interlocutions with two of my favorite people on the planet. One was Jurgen Klopp, manager of football, Liverpool Football Club at the time, and the second was a guy named Satya Nadella, who runs this little tech company in Seattle. And the interlocutor asked the question, how do you define leadership? And my own notes are leadership is all about curiosity and empathy.
Yeah.
Jurgen said it's all about curiosity and empathy, and Satya said it's all about curiosity and empathy. Now, they had slightly different words, but it was the same thing. And while that's a lesson I had to learn the hard way, what's it really mean to be curious and evidence that? And what's it mean to be empathetic and evidence that? You learn those things through lots and lots of interactions and some tough times. But the fact that two of the great leaders in the world, and I think they really are two of the great leaders in the world, came up with a set of words that are not dissimilar to what I maybe learned the hard way, gives me some confidence that we're on the right track.
Absolutely. Curious and empathetic. Absolutely. I completely agree. We're going to end on a positive because the sense of this entire discussion has been optimistic. You clearly are optimistic about the future, optimistic about the business. You're more optimistic than some people are about the economy, in the sense that you're not talking it down like many people do. And I think there's a natural tendency for people to look to the negative. If you look forward now, what should we be optimistic about as we look into the future, into the next 5-10 years? What should people think about and be optimistic about?
I do think we have a lot to be optimistic about. First is that the global economy is actually on the right track and is reasonably balanced. Second is that I think the political actors in the world are aware of the consequences of conflict, and we've had conflicts, we've had horrific conflict, we have horrific conflicts right now, and there are no winners in those conflicts. And I think that's if we needed a reminder that there are no winners in military conflict, or we could extend that to cyber conflicts or other things that are very, very disruptive. I think we get those reminders, thankfully, in relatively small ways. Not small if you're in Ukraine or if you're in Gaza, but in the context of the world, relatively small. And I look at the world leaders. I don't believe that President-elect Trump or Prime Minister Starmer or President Xi Jinping want a war. I really don't think they want a war. And they are fighting a fierce fight in terms of economic competition. And that competition isn't always a bad thing. It can be a really good thing in terms of promoting a stronger and more resilient global economy. So I think we can be optimistic that we have leaders that are very tense right now, but more or less pointing in the same direction.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point to end on. And Bill, thank you ever so much for your time. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks.